all been talking for over an hour, but welcome to our meeting, officially. Now, a couple of things I wanted to mention. On your program, on the back of your program, Lucretia's put together a little picture show, because we have a very full agenda this morning and this afternoon. We really have packed it in this time. So, just to jump into the afternoon, we will be leaving here. First of all, lunch. Then we'll have the full membership meeting, which will probably be short because we just talked about everything at the board meeting. Everyone's here, essentially. But we'll go first to the Star Library and look at their genealogical and historical area. And Nancy Kelly, who I'll introduce in a moment, will talk to us about the holdings there and where everything is. And Nancy asked that we go around the back, which brings us to a lower level, so we can come in at the lower level rather than having to go down the elevator, come in the front way. After the Star Library, people, if you'd like to stay at the Star Library and do some research, you're welcome to do that if you would like. Otherwise, we will next go to the Palatine Farmstead. And so on the back, you'll see a picture of the Star Library, which is right down this street on the left, and just a few minutes, kind of a little setback, and the address is here, and there are also some directions. So then from there we'll go to the Palatine Farmstead, which is right up Route 9. So this to the right is Mill Street, to the left is Montgomery, but it's all Route 9. Keep on that. You'll pass the intersection with 9G, and there's a Chrysler Dodge Jeep dealership to your right. Just beyond that, you'll see, as you see in this picture, this very old graveyard, which is the oldest graveyard in this area. And just immediately after these trees, right after that, you'll see on the right the farmstead. It's right on the road. And be real. As soon as you see that cemetery, slow down, because you'll be taking a quick right into the farmstead property. And then at 3, the equipment people would like to give us some refreshments, which is you come out from the farmstead, you just go up the road, take a right, and just up the road a little bit, you'll see the big stone church. Just beyond the stone church is the Equipment Resource Center. And so you have two options. One, after we go to the Star Library, if you want to stay at the Star Library, you're welcome to do that. Otherwise, you can join us at the Palatine Farmstead. Either way, at 3, you can join us at the Equipment Resource Center for refreshments. And not just refreshments, but also a discussion of some of the archaeological work that is going on at the farmstead. So you have some options here, but we are doing a lot today. Between having 2 very important presentations and having all these things this afternoon. But again, use this as a reference to get into these various places, and don't hesitate to ask any questions. Okay, so our first speaker, I'm very excited to have Nancy Kelly. Nancy Kelly is the town historian for Rhinebeck. She's also a fellow of the New York Genealogical and Historical Society, which is a very prestigious position to have. That's, to someone with that title really has something behind them. And so I'm very excited that Nancy can talk to us. And one thing I wanted to mention, our husband Arthur and she have some books on display out here. Like around lunchtime, we'll be taking a break. Please take a look at those books. They're amazing. Amazing in several ways. The number of books they have, but also each book is such a treasure trove of information. If this is some church or location that is relevant to your family, this is the place to go for those. And there's also a directory of all their books that you can buy online as well. But this gives you the opportunity to actually look at some of these books and say, is one of my ancestors or connected family in this book. I know I have the Gilead Lutheran Church baptismal records from about 17, whatever, I'm not sure the dates now, 1782 to like 1820. And I used to have to go to the state library, and I'd go down there and I'd spend a long time searching through it, and I'd go home and a week later find out some other relative who was there, and I'd have to go down again. Now I actually have it in my house. It's an amazing thing. So anyway, I'd like to introduce Nancy.
Thank you. Well, it's so nice to be able to welcome you all here to Rhinebeck, and that we can meet here in the Deacon Arms. I'm sorry that we're kind of pushed into this room. Deacon Arms is the oldest continuously operating hotel in America. We're advertising, and we actually was founded in 1766. So it's right here on the Albany Post Road, and it was a very active site from its founding. So I guess I had expected we would be in the big room, but we're a little slow in getting all our reservations in, so we ended up squished in here. So I hope we can manage okay. So here in Rhinebeck, we had 35 Palatines who came to Rhinebeck early on. By 1718, when they did a census, there were 35 families, not 35 Palatines, 35 Palatine families. And so do any of you know of any family from Rhinebeck that you're descended from?
I know that Hank Jones has a reference to my ancestor, Johann Philip Finkel, as being a tailor here at one point.
Oh, okay, great. Well, I wanted to give a short introduction to the Palatine immigration in general.
Where's East Camp relative to this?
Where's
East Camp relative
East
to
Camp
this?
is north of here in Germantown.
Okay.
And so it's maybe 17 miles from here.
Yeah, but that's where she's from.
Okay. And so they all came to East Camp to begin with, but I'll get into that as I go. The other thing that I want to stress as I'm talking with you is that in Rhinebeck, we had a lot of the leasehold system, and that's different from outright sales of property. So you'll hear me mention that as we go along. So to begin with, the Palatines were located along the Rhine River, and they were close enough to the German border, to the French border, that they were being impacted by French troops coming in, and they were impacted by very bad weather, frosts killing their grapes and making livelihood very difficult. And so I took this area that was highlighted on the former map and wrote in the names of the Palatines that came to Rhinebeck, and these different families, Schaefer and Tibble and Benner and Bacchus and Ackert, you'll see written on this map. And there's a big poster of the map at the Farmstead, so if anybody wants to study it more closely, they can do that when they visit the Farmstead. This is Mainz in Germany, and the Rhine River, so that this gives you a frame of reference. And two of the houses that I'll speak about are Bacchus and Ackert, so you can see that they were quite close to Mainz.
Is there Alsace-Lorraine? Is that in here?
That's France.
Yeah, that's just to the west.
That's across the border.
France.
Yeah.
It's where it says legend. That's Alsace-Lorraine.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Oh.
The bottom left.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's the two poses, Alsace and Lorraine.
Yes.
So you know that there was this golden book that was circulated, and it described in glowing terms what the New World would be like, and tried to get settlers for the English colonies to leave Germany and settled the land so that the French wouldn't be able to settle here. And so it's like a golden book that, a prospectus that they would give for Florida, how great it is to move to Florida. And so they do get quite a few people who left home. And this is going down the Rhine on their rafts and heading to London. The English had offered to resettle them, and unfortunately, it took them quite a while in London before they got on boats, and then quite a while they were on boats before they headed for New York. So here they are coming into the New York Harbor. That's supposed to be a diagram of what New York Harbor looked like at the time. And it was getting into October already when they were coming in. So Governor Hunter was supposed to keep a subsistence list for all the different families. And so Hank Jones has made good use of that in figuring out what the makeup of the individual family was, because it will say how many adults and how many children and all of that. And so he was supposed to keep those records, and they were supposed to get bread and beer and meat to live on while they were settling. And the arrangement was that they were to work in the tar camps. Robert Livingston had gotten a huge grant of land, and that is where the East Camp settlement was. Robert Livingston got the opportunity to provide all the subsistence, so he got paid for that. He got settlers into his land, and he allowed them to make the tarp, pitch tarp. His mansion was here at the mouth of the Rojam, which is a fairly big stream that comes into the Hudson. And right now, of course, there's no remains of that mansion, just a boat club that is located there. But this was more or less what it looked like at the time. And the folks, as they're trying to protect their family for the winter, the easiest thing was to dig into the side of hills and make a shelter. And they could do it with logs, or they could do it lining it with stone. But that was the way they were providing for themselves. So they were in East Camp and West Camp, which is on the other side of the river. And they were supposed to be going out and collecting this pitch, which at the end of this procedure, they had to burn it, the logs, and then the pitch was siphoned off into barrels. And that project didn't work out, and so by 1712, they were saying that they had to find out how to take care of themselves, and that would be the end of the subsistence, and they were on their own. That's when Henry Deacon, who had a patent for all of Rhinebeck, practically all of Rhinebeck, there was a little bit of Dutch settlement right by the river, but the whole rest of Rhinebeck was available. Henry had the land and no settlers, so he was helped to go up there to Germantown and try to encourage people to come to Rhinebeck. So here he's got, in a 1908 map of, book about Rhinebeck, they had this drawing that shows John Beatty surveying for the Palatines, and says that the date of the map was November 29, 1714. Wouldn't I love to find that map? But so far, we've not had any luck in finding it. Anyway, they even knew who the chain bearer was for their mapping project. By 1716, Henry Deacon, who was the patentee, had died. and he had 3 children, and he divided his land in his will among the 3 children. So by 1718, they were able to actually write a lease for the lands. And so I guess they came here like between 1712 and 1714. We can find their names in some of the day books that Henry Deacon left behind, but we can't find evidence of the leases until 1718, when they're signed by each of the 3 children and their spouses. And so this is a lease for John Backus, and it's only a part of the paper that was scanned. So each of the leases or indentures required them to pay a certain amount of wheat and two fat fowls and 1 day's riding as rent on the property. So they may have put up a little bit of money, but they didn't have enough money to pay for the whole property. And this was, instead of a mortgage, you have a lease. And there were 3 different kinds of leases. You could have a lease just for yourself. You could have a lease for 3 lives, so that included your children and grandchildren, or you could buy outright. So this is something to keep track of as we go along here. That Backus, eventually the property went to a Nowell family, and by 1780, there's a document that Steve Mann from the Museum of Rhinebeck History was able to purchase, and it talks about Jacob Nowell, and he's granting his property to his son, and so it looks as though by that time he had free title to the property, that he wasn't paying rent anymore. So that's interesting. And we have a picture of the building that's on that site. And so when you come to the 992 light, and you're looking at for the cemetery on the right-hand side of the road, on the left-hand side of the road is this building. And this, in a 1798 map, shows as an inn. And so it was like a stagecoach stop on the way north on the post road. And so we're very pleased that the house is still standing and in good condition. Now here's another 1718 lease. And these are located in different places. There's one at the New York Public Library. There's one that the Historical Society has in their archive. And there's only about 3 or 4 that we've been able to locate. But you see how nicely it was printed out, and then some of the details are written in by hand. And down here we have Henry Beekman's signature. But this would not be the patentee, this would be the son of the patentee. So there were 2 Henry Beekmans, and we gotta keep that straight. And so the Beekman family home is in ruins, and so there's only that state marker down toward the river on this same Rhinecliff Road. But this is what the house looked like originally. And this part is the early part. So this would be the part that was standing at the time that the Palatines had made their arrangements. And the post office is modeled after this. So our Rhinebeck post office, which is just here on the right anyway, just up the street from the Beekman Arms, joining it, is something that FDR was so interested in history that he got the postal system to build the post office modeled after this building. And it had a cannonball hole in it, supposedly from when the British came up the river during the Revolution. And so even, the cannonball hole is in the model building. These lands in green are the original patent that Henry Deacon had. And then when he split it up with his children, this line is very close to the south edge of the village here. And then one of the daughters got this land, and one of the daughters got this land. And so they tried to give them also some land that was on the river, so that there's parcels for each. Henry Deacon, the son, got this parcel, and then Catherine got this, and Cornelia got that, so that that's how the property went. Peter Fraley had I guess I showed you the earlier Fraley lease in 1718, 1772. Here's a copy of the lease that I think we found down at the Mills Mansion, the Statsburg House now they call it. And they have a great collection. And we'll go to the next slide. We'll get to it in a minute. The Lansman's Kill was very important for mill sites. And the first mill site was here, where the Lansman's Kill enters the Hudson River. And so that was a kind of a far way for all these people that were spread around in Rhinebeck to get to the mill. And so by 1740, Henry had put a new mill here closer to the village on Route 9. And so that's where they had to deliver their wheat for rent each year, and where they had to have their grain ground for their own use. The center of Rhinebeck was not here, but was at the 99G area. And that's why that marker says Old Rhinebeck, because that was the original site of Rhinebeck. And Kirkhoek is another name for that area, and that is a church corner. And they built a log church first right away. And we have records that say that by 1715, they had a minister who would act as schoolmaster, and the church was shared by the Reformed Church and the Lutheran Church. And so these families would come here for service, and then just wanted to mention that they organized the Rhinebeck precinct. Originally, Dutchess County was built, divided North Ward, South Ward, and Middle Ward. And then by 1737, they divided each of those wards more, so that we had the Rhinebeck precinct, which included Red Hook, and maybe a little bit of Milan and Clinton. That was 1737. And I guess I'm going to go to the next slide. Okay, this is the cemetery that we're speaking about. And the church would have been located somewhere in the front of this. And the cemetery has been now completely fenced and protected. And you can find some early Palatine graves in there. By 1730, they decided to split up the Lutheran Church and the Reformed Church. So the map here of 1747, and it still has a church in that location, but it doesn't look like a log church anymore. They must have built a frame building. And look at the nice weather vane. And then you'll notice that there's quite a hill here with woods, so that's called the Common. And Deacon intended to do that when he gave leases. He did not charge people for the land that wasn't good agricultural land. He called it a commons, and it was just sitting there. And so if it was, rocks and woods, and if it was low wetlands, he didn't include that in his leases. Over here is the Palatine Farmstead, farms near. And his father will show we'll first show this church. This is where the Lutheran's located, which is that stone church we said to look for before you go to the equipment house. This stone church was built 1786, I guess. So at the time, they continued to worship in the log church that was there previously, the 1730 log church, and they built the stone walls around it. And when they had it up far enough so that they could have services there, then they took each log out through the door and finished off the inside and had their church. So it has changed some since that first activity, but the footprint of the church is pretty much the same except for the front entry. So in that cemetery is, no, you're going the wrong way. There is the gravestone here of Carl Meir, and he's Francis' father. We're not quite sure where he lived, if he lived at the Farmstead at all or not, but he was what's called a list master, and so the whole group kind of reported to him, and he was an important person in the community at that time. And you can see that he died in 1733, so it wasn't long after the church had moved there, and so he actually is buried there. And the gravestone is interesting in the way it's written, because they just keep running letters around. So here is UND for and died at 61 years old. So it's kind of terrific. This is a picture of Farmstead when we first acquired it. And last year we were pleased to get a grant to be able to do the roof over. You can see that the roof is in need of great care, and you'll be surprised at how much has been done with restoration on the exterior. Now I want to mention maybe in the Farmstead, and nothing has been done to restore that north side. So I'm applying for a grant, and I would like matching funds for that restoration. And if your treasury would look kindly on the project, we would appreciate whatever thousands you could contribute toward that match. Because we want to rebuild a chimney on that side, and we want to re-side it with the original type side. So I hope you'll enjoy visiting there later. This is an example of the 1802 maps that each of the descendants of Henry Deacon made. So imagine that this is almost 100 years after the Palatines had settled. And these great landowners were still, still maintaining control over these properties. And they are color-coded according to what type of lease they have and like that. But we have these, and I want to show you these down at the library, of these maps and how detailed they are. And this is focusing in on the area of the Palatine Farmstead. So I tried to draw arrows, but they don't show up that well. Here's the stone church. Here's the equipment house north of the stone church. Over here, we have the site of the farmstead, and the site of the first church. So, that's our attempt to show the locations in 1802. So you can study those maps a little more when we actually go to see them.
Did their children, so the people of Palatine stayed here, did their children stay, or did they stay depending on the lease?
It's amazing how many children stayed, so that, you know, various generations continued on the lease. But all these families had very large families, so there'll be the older children perhaps that stayed, and the younger children went on west. So, that's why I have a lot of genealogy to do. So here's the stone church viewed from near the schoolhouse. And so remember I told you that they started out by having a school right in the church, the log church. And by this time, they had a school built on the stone church property, and that continued from until 1951, when they had the centralized school system. So all that time, there was a school right on the church property. And it's not only true here, but in Württemberg, which I'll talk about in a little while, they also had a school right on the church property. So this is an older picture of the school when it was actually operating. So I wanted to mention that Deacon not only had this property up here in Rhinebeck, but he had this great block of land which was called Deacon Patent in southern Dutchess County. And by 1723, I think I had, he had talked to some of the Rhinebeck settlers about moving down to Beekman. And so, I'll get to the Amy family that moved to Beekman a little later, I guess. I wanted to show you a few of the 18th century houses that we have spread out through the area. And starting up in Red Hook, because you know that was part of Rhinebeck, we had the Martin House, which was located near a stream up there that's called the Saltkill, and it's a very good little stream as well. And then we have another Martin house that's right on Route 9. This was a little later house, about 1776. So it's on the same area that probably the original Martins had the lease for, but they have another descendant who built a house there. The Feller house is on River Road. And the Fellers are one of my ancestors. And so if you're going toward the bridge, the Kingston-Rhinecliff Bridge, and you go to the right, it's like the first building that you come to. And it's just very near the Rhinebeck Red Hook line. Now I want to talk about this area on the southern part of Rhinebeck. And this map is huge, it's bigger than this. And was found in an attic in Rhinebeck. And they gave it to the Rhinebeck Historical Society, and they sent it for restoration. And they have it now in their archive room. And the descendant of Henry Beekman, this is Henry Beekman II, and this is a granddaughter of Henry Beekman II, who inherited all this property. And her husband is Morgan Lewis, who was a governor of New York State. And so here's Morgan Lewis with his land, and he lived at the Statsburg House, what we used to call the Mills Mansion, just south of here. And this map is especially interesting because it tells who was the original patentee, the original grantor of the, had the lease, the first lease on the property, and who had it in 1802. So you can see the generations that were involved there. And the Landsman's Kill is along that side of the map, and the Plum Elbow Creek is on this side of the map. And so he had his mill over there on the Landsman's Kill when everybody was supposed to bring their grain to his mill by 1802. So on the east side, we have, here is the Eckerts. I'll show you the Eckert house in a little while, who had settled there. And then the Fraley land, which Stephen Fraley had mentioned was Fraley leased earlier. So that the 1718 Palatines settled on the east side, closer to the Hudson River and the Landsman's Kill. But Henry and his descendants, in the 1730s, had reached out to more Palatine settlers, and they mostly came from Württemberg, Germany, and so that area was called Württemberg. The whole east section was settled by these people, and they aren't as well documented as the ones that came earlier. So Hank has worked on that, but I have only seen certain families. He hasn't got any place where there's a list of all the families that came in the 1730s.
Quick question.
Yeah.
Wheat, oats, corn, some dairy, and then fruit trees. What were they growing?
Well, originally they're mostly growing wheat and their own kinds of things. They probably had some cows and some pigs and some sheep for their own use. But wheat was the major crop until quite a bit into the 19th century. But that's true eventually. This is the Ackert house that is on Fox Hollow Road, and was still within the Morgan Lewis land. The Württemberg Church is a lovely church that originally was closer to the river and where Peter Fraley lived, and then as the people were mostly to the east of that, they built their church over here, which is currently off of 9B. And now I'm going to show you a few houses that were built by those later 1730s Palatines. This is the Krog House, and that's on Ackert Hooker, Old Primrose Road. Down at the Mills Mansion, Morgan Lewis's rent book shows the list of those who rented, and it turned out that one of these Krog family descendants had kept their rent receipts, and some Methodist church out west found these rent receipts and realized they were from Rhinebeck and mailed them to the museum. And so we've got this wonderful collection of rent receipts from several generations for this particular house that I just showed you and the farm that was located on. So over there is the rent receipt, and this is the rent book that he would have kept record of it in. And near the church is this Pultz house, which is a frame house, not a stone house, but has a very large foundation underneath. And mostly we're finding that most of the houses were built with a very large basement area that was habitable. So that in the winter you spent your time downstairs in that area. And building to the side of the hill was very popular. The Palatine settlements in Dutchess I have on this map, so that this was the original up there on the river, and then Bill will talk about the Little Nine Apartments patent, and this is Town of Clinton. And then I had already mentioned the Speakman patent area. Now here, we have a house that was formerly on the Albany Post Road, but then they bypassed it when they were making Route 9 straight, so it's now on Wheeler Road. And this house, actually, this end of it faces the road. And, but again, you can see how there was an entrance on the lower level, and then as they built the house, then they had an entrance up on the main level too. But there's an early map that shows that property, and when they describe it, apparently this house was on this property here, and the post road is going along here, and the Landsman's Kill is over on the other side. And this is where apparently the Amy family lived, and they were only there until they moved to Beekman. And they moved to Beekman and were there for quite a few generations, and now we have quite a few Amy's back here in Rhinebeck. So that's kind of nice. So now I just want to give you a little genealogy information. So the New England towns, from the time they were founded, were keeping records. And
Well, the church,
no, New England,
The town,
actually,
I hate to
town
tell you,
records.
but the town records in New England are in fact church records. Because in fact, the Congregational Church was a state church, and also in Massachusetts.
But
So they're called town records, yes,
Okay.
but they are
But
not, they are the
they're
records of the
founded-
Congregational Church,
they,
which, like our home church, until 1810, it was the town. They were the same organization.
Okay.
Wow. In fact, our church is 50 years older than the town. But the town did not separate till gradually about 1810, 1820.
oh, okay. Glad you know that. Because New York doesn't require their towns to keep records
Yes,
until
that's-
1880. And so that's why the church records and the other vital
Interesting.
record substitutes are so important. But here where we had the leasehold, if you had a lease for 3 generations, you didn't have a need to make a will as to what's going to happen to your property. So there's a lot less will and probate information in Dutchess County, and especially for Rhinebeck, than there would be in other areas. So keep that in mind. The early church records, as an example, are pretty difficult to read. And that's why Arthur has some background in reading the Old German script. And they come with some Dutch in them, they come with Latin in them. And you have to really spend some time to be able to interpret them. And he got interested in doing that. And now, I guess it's almost 50 years that he's been doing that. And so we have a lot of, almost 400 books in our publications. So here's an example, and we started out calling it Palatine transcripts, but you know, everybody thought it was Palestine. So that we finally ended up with kinship. And so to continue the spellings, we're not standardized for anybody's last name, so Eckert started at E-C-K, and now was Eckert, A-C-K, and so forth and so on. And a lot of people that are just starting with genealogy, you try to convince them that their name is the same as one of these earlier spellings, and they are not going to believe you. And then you have the naming system where you named your kid by your father's name if it was the first male. So you had 8 cousins, I mean Yeah, you could have 8 cousins that had the same name because they all did the same thing, and the time frame of their births is pretty close. So you have to be very careful as how you follow the family. And our suggestion is that you have to identify them through the sponsors so that they would have sponsors that would help you to identify which child it actually was. And I mentioned this about the fewer wills and that the church records are so important.
One thing with names, I've seen that for a woman, you have the German IN at the end of the family name. So a lot of people think it's a separate family name, but it's not. It's
Just
a
a feminine and
But
ending.
it's not clear cut, because,
No.
for example, I have a whole bunch of Stengel ancestors, and they use, that was the
They
name they
continued that
used, for
name.
men as well as women.
Yeah, even in the Gilead, I mentioned the Gilead church records in Brunswick, it varied based on the practice of the pastor. And some pastors did that, and some pastors didn't do that. So you really didn't know. There's no consistency.
Yeah, your records are very dependent on the background of the pastor and how he recorded it.
Yeah, you can read those two records. One, he'll be beautiful for about 15 years, and all of a sudden it's awful. Depending when they change pastors.
And another thing you have to watch is that there's maybe a break when they didn't have a pastor, and so they wanted to get the child baptized as soon as possible, so they had to go to a nearby church, or maybe a minister came in from far away. So that's a whole other factor. So that is.
Very nice picture. Very nice picture.
Yes, it was.
Did you see the tip over?
We saw a big rock out here. It was an pouring rain, but it said something about Western New York on it. Do you know the one we mean out here?
Well, it's talking about the Palatine, the Salisbury Turnpike. And Bill Jeffley just did a nice talk about the Salisbury Turnpike that went from Salisbury, Connecticut, across to the Hudson River and funneled people to the west. And it's on YouTube.
Yes.
You know how to Google it?
I think it's through the Rhinebeck Historical Society.
Oh, okay. So you can learn all about it.
And I think the rock references the fact that the east-west road was related to the Sapasco Trail or an Indian trail, and then the northwest, so this intersection. The northwest was also old footpath. And I think, if I remember correctly, I think that's what the stone kind of recognizes, that crossroads.
Also, you've heard the term Western Reserve of Connecticut.
Oh,
And
yes.
that's why,
There we
after the
go.
Yes,
Revolutionary
yes.
War, all the farmers decamped
Yes.
west. Okay, what that refers to is the Cleveland area. The state of Connecticut claimed everything west of Pennsylvania, all the
Yep.
way to the Pacific Ocean.
Yep.
And so, but practically speaking, we're talking about the Cleveland area. And you're absolutely right. You find that people tended to go straight west.
Yeah.
So they may have gone around to get there, but they tended to settle
Yeah.
in about the same.
Then they were familiar with the same agricultural conditions and all.
The Western New York area didn't opened up late. Actually, the Erie Canal was only a few years, and then the Erie Canal was there because of the Iroquois
Yeah.
Confederacy.
Yeah.
So I hear all the time the Niagara Frontier is still Niagara Frontier. People say it all the time, even today about it. As frontiers.
Yeah. A lot interesting, going straight west, a lot of the people from the Schoharie, Mohawk Valley end up near Jackson, Michigan. Going straight west into Michigan.
Yes.
You mentioned the Dutch naming system. I saw some of your points that were on your website too. I saw on your website as well that about around 1810 was when they stopped using the practice of the names.
Yeah.
So is that around also the same time when they started using, for lack of a better term, trendy names? For example, I have a Martin Van Buren Kilmer. I highly doubt his grandfather is Martin Van Buren, as much as I would love for that to be true. But what would you say, I mean, how, would you
Yeah.
say in this area specifically, around the 1830s and 1840s, they were still practicing the Dutch naming system, or?
No,
Okay.
after 1800, you can't rely on the Dutch
Okay.
naming system. And as you say, they would be bringing in different names, because I guess they got tired of everybody having the same name.
Did they have the patronymic here like they did in Germany?
Um,
You know what I mean by the patronymic? Johann Abraham, Johann
the middle
this,
initial?
Johann that, Johann the other thing.
You mean by the middle initial changing?
In
No.
other
Yes,
words,
that-
you
that-
named
patronymic
every
is-
son Johann something.
Yeah.
Yes,
They actually
Okay.
used the,
so
Like Russia,
especially
okay.
after 1800,
yeah.
you will find a patronymic.
Yeah, in my mind it works.
So, and oftentimes it's just an initial.
Yeah.
So if there was son of Abraham, it'll be John A. and Samuel A.
In the
and
If you wanted to name somebody John, it was Johannes.
Yes, right,
Yeah.
yes, so we actually had, for the first few generations, everyone used their middle name. I mean, that
Yeah.
became, that's what, as you said,
That's
Sue.
it's the patronymic.
Yes, that's right.
That continued into
That's
the,
the Dutch system.
Okay, no, but I mean,
Getting
the,
two systems mixed up.
or the women, it was Anna or Anna Maria.
yeah,
That's
that
German.
continued into the Mohawk Valley a little bit longer.
Yeah.
I want to ask Linda, that's still practiced to some extent in Germany now, right?
Yeah.
The person uses their second name.
Their second name, yeah.
Well, isn't that true with a lot of the Catholic baptisms, that they'll have Mary as the first name, and their middle name as the second name?
Maria this, Maria that, Maria the other.
Maria, Anna.
Well, the one thing I'm amazed at, since I like agriculture, is that this land stayed fertile for so long. For a lot of places, they grew their crops, the ground went bad, they just moved on. Here, generation after generation and generation, it seemed like they kept this land going, and it was fertile enough to support families.
I wanted to mention, like Christian actually mentioned that, my parents, without realizing, actually did that practice that with my name, because my name is actually Arthur Gary Finkel. My father's name was Arthur, and the Gary is my mother's maiden name, Mick Gary.
Okay.
So, without fully realizing it, they fit right into that.
Yeah, into the old German system, which was Johann this and Johann that and Johann the other.
Back to the naming thing. I'm sorry. It's like the only thing I can kind of grasp onto is understanding that. So in maybe census records, for example, they use their middle name on those, and then in baptism records, they use their given. What would you say the changes in this area?
Well,
In the middle, just
in the early time when they were using Johannes as the beginning name, then they would focus on the middle name to differentiate them, so that in, other than the baptism record, you may not find the Johannes beginning to the name. But, by the 1800s, then you're finding, the first name is the given name that they're using, and the initial is the
so
patronymic.
it's still in the middle.
Now, Jay again.
Yeah, I noticed for me, George was in the family. Everybody was supposed to be named
Yeah.
George, including me, and my mother said no. So I'm J. George Whopper.
You're Jay.
So
George.
she said no. And so maybe this is what happened later on. There were so
Yeah.
many, and George's confusion, that
Yeah.
the
They-
women
they-
said absolutely no, we can't keep
They
track of all these
realized it
kids.
was getting ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't.
One of the families that we have here in Rhinebeck is a Traver family, and they were wonderful at producing male sons. So that, I'm sure that kind of a problem got exacerbated because of the number of males in that Traver family. And they had to come up with some different names. Okay, well, it's very nice.
Thank you very much.
Thank
I'm going to take a quick break.
That's gonna give me a chance to set.
Just
a little more.
Bill Jeffway actually sort of enhanced our program by getting a new job. He was just the co-chair of the Town of Milan Bicentennial Commission, but then he became the executive director of the Dutchess County Historical Society.
Right.
So that just, you know, like I said, raises the level of this meeting tremendously. But this is Bill Jeffway.
I'm very glad to be here, thanks. And just on a personal note, unrelated to this, my German ancestry is on my mother's side from the village of Hohenpuls, which I've been back to. But in the 1850s, the Vollingers came over and engaged in farming in Massachusetts, so that's my German
That's a
ancestry.
rarity to have Germans in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Well, watch where my family went
Really?
to.
See.
There were Germans and Poles, and there was like a who's gonna win the farming battle. Anyway, so it was interesting. You know, a couple of questions came up, like what happens to the children? Do they sing it? So this is really very complimentary in that sense to Nancy's talk, because she talked about where the action was in terms of the things starting out. And then I'm going to look at one town inland, so we're getting a little more rural, the town of Milan, and but more recent history, what happened since then. And I always think the great thing about local history is it's kind of a personal face on big concepts. We know that we had kind of a colonial aristocracy before we became the United States. We know that there was this great movement to freedom and freedom of religion and diversity, and this puts some very personal names on those big movements and big things that happened. So I thought I'd first give you a snapshot of Milan, and we were talking about naming. I've had some people suggest that we say Milan because so many Germans founded it. It's kind of how a German would pronounce Milan. So I'm just going to see if you can hear this little thing. This is because my German's not any good. Let's see if you can hear this.
Milan. Milan.
So I'm told so it's not quite like we're Milan and Rhinebeck. Anyway, there were like 13 more Milans after this, but we're the first Milan in the United States in 1818. So I took a look at the 1820 census, kind of looks like basically the bottom line is about half the founding people in Milan at the time of its creation, I say have Palatine heritage, but if a Palatine man married an Irish woman and she took his name, then she'd be on my list. So it's not scientific in any way. But that said, that's still significant that so many people have that kind of name. So then if you look today at what are the evidence, what remains of the Palatine families? If you go right at, Milan has no town center. It kind of famously had a handful of hamlets, never had a town center. It was kind of a place a lot of people went through. They went through on the Salisbury Turnpike. But, now I'll do it.
Oh, okay.
I'll do it if you want. That's right. No, don't worry. I'm going to use a space bar. It's easier to hit. So we have these two buildings that literally face each other, and they give me a perfect chance to talk about two founding families, the Rao family and the Kilmer family. I think we have some Kilmer familiar people here. I've bumped into Martin Van Buren Kilmer as well in my research. But these buildings are lookalikes with very specific intent. So the Rao Church was built in 1838 and remains there today. And the town hall, a gift of Irene Kilmer, her married name Wilcox, but a gift of Irene Kilmer, she very intentionally wanted the town hall to mirror the Rao Church. The Rao Church was a gift of the Rao families. The town hall's gift of the Kilmer, we have to say Wilcox because that's her married name, but it really was her gift and her individual decision to do that. So, okay, a colonial aristocratic prelude. I just wanted to give a snapshot. We talked about it a bit, but this little, it's like a little ad ran in 1919 about historical Dutchess County, and it was talking about the fact that tenant farming originated in America here in this region, and it really was an issue, and there were rent issues and so on. Milan in particular had some landlords that lasted into 1889. George Clark and his descendants clung on to those land holdings until 1889, and it was broken up and sold. And you can see that one of the people was a David Kilmer, but as we'll find out, there were a lot of Kilmers in Milan. But, you know, talk about this legacy of leaseholding and the impact that it had. And yet, if we look back at Livingston Manor, we talked, so the question was about where exactly East Camp is. This will kind of talk to that. Things were often organized by rivers and streams, right? So even in the Native American times, the Rojan, which comes way from the north and then loops up, was Mohican territory. And the Wappingers Creek was more Wappingers territory. And this was an area that was kind of in between again. Very much an area that was in between. But Livingston's deed for his massive acreage noted that it was the southern bow of the Roll of Jansen Kill that would be the marker, including the southern bank, so that he had both sides of the river. So there it is. I can't remember, I'm blanking on the thousands of acres that he had up there, but how could a little town get carved out in 1818 and not have some influence from the manor of Livingston, given that it's so next door? And there is East Camp, Palatine town, the camp, where it all happened, at least for a brief moment.
How many generations before they moved? And what was it?
Okay. Then Nancy spoke a bit about the Little Nine Partners patent. It was the last little piece of the puzzle. And it was created in 1702, but it wasn't subdivided until 1744. Like, nobody was really interested in being there. That's the point. But good old Robert Livingston, third lord of the manor, managed to get his hands, he wasn't one of the original 9, but he managed to get his hands on lot 22. And lot 22 becomes interesting because it's sold to Johannes Rau. And it's also interesting because if you use it as a lens to look at what happened in Milan, you will see that Johannes Rau sold land to very prominent Quakers, and they built the Quaker meeting house very close to his Methodist meeting house. You'll see that he sold a significant amount of land to a free black, what would be then, I guess, African-American family, the Jacksons, whose descendants remain today. And we'll talk about that. So this little parcel, if you use it like as a little lens and microscope to look through, shows you how Rau introduced this kind of diversity in religion and ethnicity and race even. Before Milan was founded, we had the town of Northeast. Basically, the Little Nine Partners patent was the town of Northeast. Robert Livingston's very valuable ironworks were here. And I found it interesting that if you look in the records, this is the town of Northeast officers in 1752. You see the Raus and the Kilmers kind of emerging already, right? They're kind of doing stuff. So John Rau's a pathmaster. This might be senior. I'll explain that in a second. And then Simon is a poor master. 1752. The thing I want to talk about shortly after that, I want to talk about 1760. Because in 1760, the Rau family, there was a Nicholas Rau, who was the father of Johannes Sr., and then there was Johannes Jr. Johannes Sr. did not live in Milan, but he's worth noting because he became quite well known in working with the Moravian missionaries, as did his daughter become well known, and she married a missionary. They lived in Armenia, and the descendants have put up a nice little monument to him. And it's a monument to him and his descendants. But this is Johannes Rau Sr. They describe it on the monument as the father of the Rau family in America, later came to America. He was known as the Indians and missionaries' friend. His daughter Jeanette gave her life and died in missionary work. And he was very well known in that part of New York and Connecticut. So he died, and we maybe learn a little bit more than we need to know about him when we find out the weight of his gallstone, is it? Or he died of the gravel at Armenia, April 27th, 1768. And anyway, they weighed his whatever medical issue was having. He's like, no, this is too much information. I don't need to know that. But this was in the papers at the time. And I just mentioned it because the Rouse, wherever they went, the Rouse had some big impact. But I'm really not going to focus on him as much as I'm going to focus on his son, Johannes Rouse Jr. He's the person that really was the mover and shaker in Milan. And I'm focusing on the date of the 2nd of November 1760. That is the day that he purchased from Robert Livingston, third lord of the manor, 911 acres, that lot 22, where so much happened. This is the deed carefully kept by the Brow Church to this day. I went and photographed it recently, and that says a lot, I think, about a church that can keep something for several hundreds of years in such good shape. Robert Livingston, it was called Junior in that instance, and Mary selling lot 22. There's the reference to the lot number in the Little Nine Partners patent. And as I say, Milan gets broken off somewhere around here. Let's just see what happens in this for the next 200 years. And by the way, like here's George Clark. So remember, that would have been leasehold till 1889. But this is different. Livingston actually sells to Johannes Rau, and he buys it, and he owns it, and then can do what he wants with it. I'm going to take the little clipping. This is a contemporary aerial view of what it would have been lot 22. And one of the first things he did was build his home. And the scale, and the fact that it's stone and 2 stories, and the scale suggests that he had a good amount of money. Unfortunately, by the 1940s, when it was photographed by the Historic American Building Survey, it was almost on its way out. Beautifully depicted in the 1802 Salisbury Turnpike map. These are various photos. I think this is the 30s. But this really was the home of Johannes Jr. And you read newspaper articles later on about his children getting married, and they had parties there and dancing, and it all comes alive. You look at a ruin, and sometimes it's a ruin, but there was great life and energy, and it really was a focal point in Milan for a long time. We're going to just continue to look at what happens in lot 22. Unfortunately, one of the first things he has to do is create a cemetery for his son, who died, is it 1765? 1765, this one on the right, and of course, John himself is there. So he builds the cemetery, gets interested in Methodism, and the other things going on are his son, Mark, who's also very involved in the church, builds a house that's there to this day in this beautiful style. That's also the Historic American Building Survey in the 40s. So that there's the stone house for the father. By 1818, this house was built. The next thing he did, you can tell I do love the Salisbury Turnpike map. Here's the Methodist meeting house in Johannes Rau, 16 miles from Salisbury. And you have these beautiful Greek Revival, classical buildings of the church and the parsonage, built as a gift from Johannes Rau, or the Rau, I should say the Rau family. Interestingly, coincidentally, and it makes an amazing story, the town hall is also there, but I'm going to have to wait until we talk about the Kilmers. But all this is happening in lot 22. Hold on your seats. So I was talking about some of the pluralism, in early Milan, and even just prior to the American Revolution, or just after the American Revolution. In the 1780s, Johannes Rau sold a good deal of that chunk, the southern chunk, to Benjamin Thorne, who was able to build both a grist mill and another type of mill that I can't recall off the top of my head. The Thorne family were very well-known Quakers, and then this grew with so many of the Thorne family became known as Thorndale. It is today the corner of Field Road and Salisbury Turnpike. But this was the house that he built. It's no longer there. This was Benjamin Thorne's house from the 1780s, captured in its last days in the 80s. I have no depiction, I don't know why, but we don't have any depiction of the Quaker meeting house in Milan. So this is one from the oblong that I just borrowed, because I'm sure it was very simple. But, so you had the Rao family creating kind of a Methodist community. You had the Thorne family very literally adjacent, creating a Quaker community. And wanted to talk a little bit about the African and African American community, because there was a much larger community of color before the Civil War than there is to this day. This is the population of the Federal Census from 1820 to 1990. Milan has about the same number of people, which is just under 2,000 people, right? But look what happened in the middle. That's right, we were talking about that. Erie Canal, railroad, depression. So 1930, don't have many more than 600 people there. And then it slowly climbs back up, and really then after World War II, it re-engages. But it's a very different community here than it was there. And that's because we had slavery in New York until 1827. And I estimated, before Milan was broken off, I kind of had to guesstimate who we were talking about in the census for the whole town of Northeast. But roughly, in the area that is today Milan, in 1790 there were perhaps 54, I say people of color because I think there were mixed races of all varieties. And you can see that the majority were in red enslaved, and then by 1800 there are more persons of color, but a greater proportion are free, until of course you get to 1830, 3 years after slavery's ended, and you have about 54 persons of color. And then by 1930 there are 9, and it's really just 2 families left. One of them, the Jacksons that I'll talk about, that the Rao sold to, and then 1980, not much different.
Where did they go after the slavery ended? Just to the big cities?
Cities. So either Poughkeepsie or even bigger. But it was a move to more urban centers. Yeah. And some west, but I think more to urban centers. So in 1810 would be, if you look at the Rao family, like any wealthy family, they owned slaves. John, Mark, Nicholas did anyway. They each had 3. I don't know if this was something about the father leaving the out the same number, but we don't know. But interestingly, that was 1810. This is 1863. William Rao and Charlotte sell to Henry Jackson 33 acres of farmland, and he becomes kind of a founding farmer. It's just a couple months after the Emancipation Proclamation. I think that's just a coincidence. They were free blacks prior to that, at least according to the census. They just didn't own land. So, who were the Jacksons that the Rao family sold to? Well, God bless Henry and Elmira, because they had 12 children, and then you'll see this is the 1865 census, I think. You see this Jasper Jackson. It's amazing. I find it amazing. But I spoke to Jasper Jackson's grandson earlier this year, and if we can get a video to work, you'll hear what he said. But I find that kind of an amazing connection to the past. But so Henry and Elmira were the landowners, and they raised all these children with Ferris Jackson living really into the 1940s in Milan. This is the house that they built. That's the Jackson house around the time that they bought the land. It's still there on Rao Road in famous Lot 22, where you see everything happened in Lot 22. And there's a wonderful Jackson family album. And we don't know the names attached to the people, but it's a pretty amazing photograph. And I think we're going to see if we can get a video to work. Walter Patrice is 99 in October. He'll be 100. He was an officer in World War II. He served in Europe, and he talked about this. Oh, there it is. Oh my God, fingers crossed. Where's the
I used to ask my brothers how the number of pictures I had. They were in an album that belonged to one of her aunts, one of the Jackson girls. And I would say, oh, who are these people? She said, I have no idea. I was only a kid. But okay. So therefore, I don't know who these people are, but I know they're members of the Jackson clan. There were a lot of outstanding African Americans between Red Hook and what is now the Parkway. St. Paul was named after an African American. He lived in the Rock City area. I don't know what his claim to fame was. There were a lot of African American musicians, and whenever they had a fair or something going on, they played and sang and danced. And after the proclamation, a lot of people just left the farm. But a lot of those African Americans from that area came into Poughkeepsie, like my grandfather, Jasper Jackson. There's a lot of African American history in that area.
Anyway, I think that's an interesting,
that's cool.
interesting connection to the to that time frame. He's wonderful too because he's very sharp. He's lost most of his eyesight, but boy, everything else.
How do you
Oh, I think you go down one, and then how do you do start from?
Yeah, good start.
There's something that says
That's right.
start. Oh,
On your slideshow, you can get it
That's
to
probably
say, you want to
Jack's
start with a
Probably.
countdown
Great
slide.
grandfather.
The icons, names across from
Wow.
all
Here's
the
a
way
couple
over to
names.
Oh, this
slideshow.
Oh,
one.
slideshow.
Yeah.
Bear with us a little momentarily.
They have
It
two
says
cities named
from
after
current
it. Oh,
slide.
Okay, thank you.
Nice.
Thanks, Nancy.
Okay, good. And then it's kind of sad to say, but we kind of start to say goodbye to the Rao family when Horace Rao dies in 1914. The Rao family is kind of wrapping up in Milan. The Rao family land is sold by 1917, and the Raos no longer really live in Milan. But I found a letter 10 years later from a Rao descendant, must have been 26 or 1927, and they were proposing that if the Rao Church could put up half the money, which is matching funds, the Rao family would put in half the money, and they would buy the stone house as a social house for the church. Don't we wish that happened? But and then, my last point, and then I'll be, is so that didn't happen. The Depression, I assume it was the Depression that kind of derailed things.
The Rowe family moved to Salisbury, New York.
Salisbury, is that? And
So
where
that's
is
north
that?
of Dowsville. And it was open land after the Revolutionary War, and a lot of people from this area came over and moved into that area. Actually, my sister, her first husband was Rowe.
Oh, really?
His name is John Keith Rowe.
Oh, interesting. Because I've spoken to someone who's a descendant. They live in Rochester.
Yeah, well, they're in Rochester too. They went everywhere.
went everywhere.
They're large families.
But that's why I showed that
Yeah.
monument that the descendants made, because the descendants are very aware of the
Right.
significance
Well,
of their
Jack
ancestors.
was the youngest of 7 children.
Wow.
Okay, and this is current, you know?
Hmm.
And I went to school with him, and my sister married him. And he divorced him.
That's the way.
There are also Rows, R-O-W-E, in the Buffalo area.
Yeah, they moved west.
In Buffalo, but and Jay actually was very good friends from high school with a Row, but his family came from Canada to
Oh.
Buffalo.
Yeah.
I
But
wonder-
they got a lot of land up
I
in
wonder
Salisbury.
if some of them may have been loyalists.
That could be.
A
That
lot of
could be.
loyalists in Hudson Valley ended
Yep.
up in.
And
in
actually, the Rowe family that my brother-in-law was, actually, they have a lot of Indian blood in their family, and one of my brother-in-law's sister's grandchildren went to school on a full scholarship
Oh, really?
from the Indians. Yeah,
It's amazing.
so it was kind of interesting.
It is interesting. It's such a web. So, okay, so that's going to be it for the Rows for a little while. But they really live on in that the Row Church becomes a focal point of the Milan community, including the Kilmer family. So it's a nice transition. We're going to talk first about, we're talking about this before. I took the 1875 census. I looked to see how many Kilmers there were. 80. There were 80 Kilmers. lots of Davids, lots of Georges, lots of, anyway, you can kind of see the generations emerging. But I chose 1875, it seemed to be when they peaked. So Milan population is 1,300, and about 80 of them have the surname Kilmer. There are 2 children here, Norman and Angie, and they would soon find each other, fall in love, get married, and they would have a child. And that child is Irene Kilmer, who is the topic of the rest of the story. I find it interesting. In the sense she was picking up where the Rao family left off, I find it a little bit interesting that she was born on the same date as the Rao's purchase of the land, November 2nd, just 134 years later. So November 2nd becomes an important date. This was when the Rao family bought the land. This is when Irene Kilmer is born. Very cute. She turns into a beautiful woman. Here she is in Milan in the mid-teens.
I didn't know.
And she caught the eye of an admirer, Frederick Peck Wilcox, who had the distinction, he came from Meriden, Connecticut. His father was a door-to-door salesman for these kind of little pots and things. He was a door-to-door salesman who invented a new way with his brother to plate silver. They became the Meriden Britannia Company, and then they became International Silver. And so the Wilcoxes started out in Meriden, Connecticut. They were in the city by the time Frederick was growing up. This is the kind of family, I think they were kind of a crazy family, so he's got his back turned. And then I suppose this is the regular picture, but the father's got his eyes looking, I don't know what they're doing, but anyway. I don't know how ordinary they were. But you can see, this guy grew up with very little money, and he is one of the wealthiest people around at that time. What happens by 1919? A couple of things. Frederick Peck Wilcox Jr. pieces together a bunch of farms, including land from the Kilmer family. It's actually he was in the process of purchasing multiple farms, piecing them together for an estate, and that's how he met the Kilmers. They were both neighbors, and then he bought, I don't know which part, but part of that used to be a Kilmer farm. Also in 1919, they got married on February 18th. It says congratulations. I'm sure it's heartfelt. This is the Oakdale Farm. Here is the happy couple. He finally has an heir. He was married once and ended in divorce quickly, no children. He's getting on. He finally has a son and a beautiful house and a beautiful farm. All is well, but as his focus, I found interesting, this is a 1921 article, was planting forestry. So he didn't like to farm so much, but he was really into trees. And this was a time when, as farmers were going to better land, the question was, well, what do we do with this kind of mediocre land? The answer was grow trees. And I find it kind of interesting that, I'll just read what he said here. I guess I can read it from here. He said, if one is not afraid of a long-time investment and wants to build up a substantial property for the benefit of his children, I do not believe there is any better method. So he was very conscious of leaving a legacy to his son that was very physical in the sense of that farm. And this son, by 1947, is winning awards in forestry. So the son's doing well. I mentioned that the Rao Church is integral to the kind of social fabric of that part of Milan. If you look at the Cemetery Association, you'll find that Miss Irene Kilmer, before she was married, was vice president, and Henry Jackson was president. And you constantly see Ferris Jackson, no, I meant Ferris Jackson. No, yes, I meant Ferris Jackson. Henry's the father. Here it is, 1927. Ferris Jackson is not only in the choir, but he's the organist. I think this is 1909. Ferris Jackson is a soloist, so he was known for his singing and playing the organ, and he was very well known and well liked. But you kind of had the integration of all those families: the Rows, the Jacksons, the Rows with their church, the Jacksons through the descendants. And then I love this, in 1927, the Sunday school has decided to picnic on Mr. Wilcox's beautiful grounds sometime in August, and he does have beautiful grounds. Anyway, so all these communities are coming together. But, of course, Mr. Wilcox has to go sometime. In 1942, he dies. This is the monument in Pine Plains. But he dies and his sister dies. His sister is quite wealthy. She lives at the family estate on the Upper West Side of New York. She dies the same year and leaves Frederick Peck Wilcox Jr. her estate. So suddenly the son is getting set up to have quite a sizable estate, both in terms of property and money. So that's 1942. The son's doing well. He enlists in the Navy after he got his forestry awards, and he loved to pilot a private plane. And while he was in the Navy in 1950 and home, he took an errand run from his farm to Poughkeepsie and died in a plane crash. So that was a real shock because he was the only child. He was the only son. So you can imagine Irene Wilcox suddenly has all these hopes, and then suddenly they're gone. And so the question then becomes, what does she do with them? What does she do with the rest of her life? And she decides to spend the rest of her life giving away her money and estate. And so, unfortunately, Frederick Peck Wilcox Jr. is buried there with them in 1950. And Irene Wilcox gifts the Oakdale farm to Dutchess County. It's called Wilcox Park. And the little trees that Frederick Peck Wilcox Sr. Planted are about 150 acres of massive trees.
Beautiful.
Mrs. Wilcox, whether they liked it or not, she oversaw on a day-to-day basis. She said, I'm going to give the town a town hall, but it's going to be my way, and I'm going to come and I'm going to sit and make sure you're building it the right way. But I thought one of the most important things was that she really had a high regard for the church and what came before. So she wanted it to both kind of fit architecturally, but also just feel right as a community. I had said Milan never had a town center, and it didn't. But there's kind of a heart of Milan here, because there were perhaps at one point maybe 4 or 5 churches, but this is the only church that remains. And of course, there's only one town hall. So she dies in 1977 after giving the Oakdale farm to the county, paying for the town hall construction. She paid for the renovation of the Roud Church. It was lifted up, and a basement was built under it, which has allowed it to, unlike there was a twin building which has collapsed. The building in that basement saved it. So she renovated the church. She gave money to several cemeteries for their upkeep. She gave money to fire departments, all before she died in 1977. And so I like to think that these two things, kind of a religious institution and a civic institution, you drive down the road, there they are on each side. And I think, they're tangible reminders today of what was in the past. And I think that's it. Those aren't the colors, they're just fun people. Questions?
Now, you said you're a Kilmer?
I am, yeah.
Do you know how
My mother, oh, absolutely. She's like, I don't know, we're back. Pretty much all Kilmers are related. I mean, I'm still finding cousins, and I'm like, Mom, I talked to cousin Kilmer, and so Kilmer in Ontario. There's a Kilmer that actually works at the Adrian's Library, and I found that one, which was like,
it is really hard. You can imagine 80 Milan and 18, and that's just one town.
oh yeah, they breed like rabbits.
They had a lot, also a lot of male children.
Absolutely. I'm one of 4 daughters though, so it changed.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I know exactly where I fit in, and I've been kind of stalking them for Passover.
Now, are you related to Joyce Kilmer?
No, I'm not.
I-
I'm
could I
not.
just-
Yeah,
we
I'm
just
actually
made-
from Somerset, New Jersey.
Oh,
I'm
really?
just right next door.
Oh, that's
yeah.
funny, because we were
Yeah.
just in New Jersey, that's a.
Yeah, no, I know exactly where I fit in. You mentioned, all these, I know exactly where
Do
I
the
am.
Kilmers get together at all on a picnic at all once a year or anything?
Not anymore. No,
Not that I know of.
There used to be a long time ago, but that's.
Val Kilmer?
Val Kilmer?
Oh, yes.
Oh, no, I've never been able to place. I have eBay filters set up for all my ancestors, and I get Val Kilmer stuff all the time. I don't want that.
Now, do you know where the Kilmers came from in Germany and when
Oh,
they got?
Brown, yeah. I've done the Y-DNA now.
Where have they, can you tell us a bit about where we're from?
Well, kind of why I'm all here. Sarah Israel sent me the information about today, and I was like, oh my god, because I'm pretty much all over trying to figure out my island. I'm staying with Johanna Bard too, so I'm picking her brain. I've met with her before as well in the basement.
I see,
and
I see.
are you going tomorrow by any chance?
Yes.
I will be
Tomorrow,
there because
yeah.
she invited me as well.
Okay, good.
But yeah, so I mean, I'm just trying to understand all these different things, because when I do understand all these different pieces of history and how they pertain in social customs and geographic boundaries, I'm able to find other things that I never
Yeah, there's so
knew
many
existed.
intersections.
Yeah, it's so many different things. Like I found, it's insane. Like I've made connections that no one's ever, I don't know, just random little pieces that are in basements of libraries. I've dug in basements and get dirty, all that stuff to find that. But yeah, so it kind of all starts with, for me, I only can document so far back as one ancestor who was probably born between 1800 and 1810. He died in 1861 from an argument with his son-in-law. That one's fun. It was over bread. There was no food in the house. And my family still fights like that today. We don't kill each other over it. But yeah, so I mean, from that point, but I've done the Y-DNA, and so I know it's from Alton Grown Out, and I know it's part of the Palatines, so
Oh, wow, that's very cool.
it's kind of where it all.
Where was it?
I'm probably mispronouncing it because my German grandmother pronounces it completely differently, and I have absolutely no idea how she says it. Alton Grown Out. I don't know how to. Yeah. And
I could put in one last plug for milenewyorkhistory.org.
I also checked out your website. It's really good.
In what state is that? What?
I'm not really sure. I'm not like 100%. Like I'm not that far back in terms of. So like I'm trying to focus on, because I like to, being in the DAR, I like to like make sure I have each document before I.
But
do
if
the
you
next
have
step.
a name, where
Yeah.
is it in Germany?
Oh, Kilmer. It's in that town. Yeah.
In what location of Germany?
Oh.
Mine says Nebenbach.
Yeah.
Oh, is that there?
Is it Bavaria or is it
No, it's
Hesse?
Still take questions.
Bonn?
Sure.
I can pull
Is it
it up
Baden?
actually.
Well,
Probably.
Most of everything,
It's right,
that's
I think
it's
it
where the
might
Black
be.
Forest is.
Most likely.
he was there.
I have everything in Google Drive, right? All that stuff, but-
You know, what's interesting is
Yeah.
that Rao, in terms of to get back to the Rao name,
Yeah.
that was the commander, the Hessian commander, I believe when Washington crossed the Delaware.
Oh, really?
And I think he was the commander of that Hessian unit that Washington.
There were different spellings. What spelling did?
Well, it's RAU,
R-A-U.
but I think that is the original spelling of this family.
I think it is. And there were, I think there were significant rows in, it was, there were people of note in that area at that time. It was
Yeah.
Nicholas Rao who really was the kind of adult immigrant.
I see.
It was the father of Johanna Senior.
Yeah, yeah. Now you had the little nine partners, and then you had the was it greater nine partners?
Well, yeah, it was called the Nine Partners Patent first, which was the bulk of it, and then because to differentiate, I don't know why they had to have 9 more partners, but they did. But to differentiate, they added the word little 9 partners. So that
I see.
and it was split up. I found it, Dutchess County. Here's another plug for a website. They have been posting, they call ancient documents. If you could do Dutchess County ancient document search. Now, ancient in Dutchess County means like some 1700s. But I was able to go on there and I found, for example, when they carved up the Little Nine Partners patent in 1744, I always wondered, like, how do you decide who gets which lot? Well, they had 2 boys under the age of 16 do a lottery. And I found that out by going to the Dutchess County Ancient Document Search and looking for things that referenced, well, I was using the names of the Little Nine Partner owners. But it is pretty cool what's going up there, all these 18th century documents, indexed.
I just, actually Lucretia noticed this, but I,
They
yeah,
did a
I
lot
think
of-
it is.
We have a land grant.
I think this is my
We have a lot of things.
ancestor's brother,
Really?
Philip Finkel.
Is that
And,
right?
yeah, I'm descended from his brother,
Because
George.
I bumped into
Johann
a
Philip and Johann George.
Yes,
Yes.
that sounds nice. But I noticed there, somewhere I saw Finkel marry a Hillman.
Oh, that's a shame.
I'll have to find out where that happened. I thought, well, that's not surprising. Isn't that cool?
Yeah,
That's
that
cool.
is, Lucretia, I didn't see that.
Conceptual set of Finkel.
Oh, that's good. See, I found that just a couple days ago. I found it a couple days ago on the county website. It's
Because over on the gal.
very handy. So isn't that funny?
Yeah.
So I just want to observe about the difference in spellings over time. And of course, RAU and RAUH were German sort of spellings and pronounced Rau. But then they started spelling it ROWE. And so by the time they got to Western New York, it's Row.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, isn't that interesting?
Well, yeah, a lot of people, when they came over here, particularly in the 19th century, anglicized their names.
Yeah.
Well, for one thing, if you were, first you understand, people, if they were successful, they were very successful, because it was the day before the income tax.
Yeah.
And if you wanted to be successful, it was very important to not be known as an immigrant. So as soon as you spoke English halfway decently, you didn't deny. For example, my great-grandfather, Andrew Upland, all the death certificate and all the old stuff say he was born in New Jersey State. That's nonsense. He was born in Germany. And I came over as a boy of 5. I know what is true, but all the older records, they say he was born in Jersey, which is where they were originally born, that they came over. Why? Because you didn't you were successful, and he was very successful. You didn't let on that you were an immigrant.
Different levels.
Was there a New Jersey
You know what I mean?
branch of the Rau, R-A-U family? Because I have a married woman with a last name of Rau in my background, and they were from New Jersey.
Clearly like it used to be, you just have to
There is
trace back.
on Ancestry, this guy that I spoke to is I think he's called Row Histories, Row Histories. I actually spoke to him, he's Row, but anyway, he seems to be doing good research work on Ancestry that's pretty well sourced and documented. So it's Row Histories is his name, and I was just looking at it this morning. He's like, you might be able to answer questions like that looking at his work. And he responds well to messages.
I know I have a Tipu family. There are Tipus in New York State, and there are Tipus in New Jersey. And then just recently, with DNA, they've got them connected way back in Germany, quite a few generations back, actually. But the families did go different directions.
Yeah.
And you would think of the immigrant thing that
Never did it.
if you wanted to look good, a blue-blooded American, you would that better for your kids to marry well if that family thought you were, even though you were well off, but you weren't an immigrant. So I think that maybe would be one of the reasons why you look good, so your kids can marry good, maybe.
There was real, you have to understand the culture in the 19th century.
Yeah.
There was real pressure to become an American.
Yeah.
So if you want to figure out what was important, for immigrants, I will tell you, one of the most important things was to become an American.
Yeah.
Well, stop and think. The time, in the 1600s, you're talking 3 months. Even with the steamships in 1890, you're talking a week or a week and a half in steerage. As a practical matter, for all except a minuscule number of wealthy people, it was a one-way, irrevocable decision to become an American. I'm sorry, that was the facts.
Yeah.
And when you came over here,
It varied though. If you were agricultural German and went to an area like Pennsylvania or out in the Midwest some places, you stayed German in that area. In fact,
yeah.
it was the First World War. Most of them had to change.
I have friends who lived in Bolinworth.
But if you were a city person, and
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
it was different.
Yeah.
I was gonna go back to this, how the family scattered. Philip Finkel had quite a few sons, and at least two of them ended up going to Tulpehocken, Pennsylvania, which was one of the Palatine communities.
Yeah.
And then from there, some of them went to Washington DC. In fact, one of his sons was a doctor and was a physician with Washington's troops.
Oh, wow.
But then my ancestor, Philip's younger brother, was a loyalist, and most of the family ended up in Canada. So within 2 generations, you've got people in New York, Pennsylvania, and Canada.
Oh, yeah.
With very quickly.
And on different paths.
Yes, yes, that's right.
One point about leaseholds, just to bring it up to the present, Nancy mentioned them. The Reformed Church, which is just across the corner here, still has leaseholds in the village of Rhinebeck today. So there are people that buy homes
Really?
in the village and don't own the land under their homes, which presents a certain amount of mortgage problems for them. And they go out to try and get it, but because
There
the
are
land.
parts of Maryland where where most of the places are, the land is
Yeah.
sold separately.
Yeah, and we, the church, receives annual rents, and we,
A guinea fowl, or what is
no,
it?
no, it's the equivalent in most cases of about $10. And we've never been able to increase the annual rents, because in order to do that, we'd have to get permission from all the Livingston descendants, or the land would revert to the Livingston family. That was part of the original deal. So there are, I don't know how many properties within the village that are still on the land by the Reformed Church. That is a
Salamanca,
mess.
this is sort of a very different situation, but in terms of the effect on the people, Salamanca is owned by one of the Native American groups, I think Tuscaroras, or Senecas. And-
Senecas.
Is it the Senecas? Yeah, so no one in that town owns their land. You know,
Yeah.
It's always questionable as to where that's gonna happen.
And when I think it was about 15, 20 years ago, when they really wanted to get the rents up,
Right.
some guy tried jacking his house up and taking it off the,
You're kidding.
and they didn't bring it back and put it back on the foundation. He says, I'm gonna go outside the res, you know? It's very interesting. That's on the New York PA border, Salamanca, the Allegheny River comes there. It's right near Allegheny State Park, and there's a big, huge gambling casino there now.
Yeah.
So, it's interesting area.
Well, thank you, Bill, so much.
That was my pleasure.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah. They're both great presentations.
Here's Brenda.
I was just gonna say, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I've got your lunch menus here, and it would facilitate your lunch ordering if I handed them out before you all get up and move
Good
from your
idea.
places. You can look them over and think of your order, and then I'll send the server in 5 minutes to take it. Then you can take your break into the library or the lobby, and we'll clean this up for you and get it all ready for your lunch.
Okay, thank you. That sounds good.
Perfect. Poor master, he was in charge of people that were,
Waving and stuff, I said, damn, those are my people.
Yeah.
And I never would have thought, but I just like to share that with you. The old photograph is the original. You can even get a better look if you have a strong
Some of those
magnifying.
old ones are so sharp, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So, just thought I'd mention
That's
that.
cool.
That's good to know. I would never think of doing that.
okay.